What happens when one of Hollywood's most relaxed and easygoing stars suddenly finds himself in an unexpectedly tense moment on live television?
Why are you overdoing?
This is unacceptable. How could you let this happen?
I'm doing my best here, but you're not making it any easier.
When Matthew McConaughey stepped onto the set of The View that morning, no one in the studio, from the producers to the audience members, had any idea they were about to witness a moment that would be talked about for days afterward. What was planned as a routine appearance to promote his latest book slowly transformed into a deeply uncomfortable and emotionally charged exchange that caught everyone off guard. McConaughey had built his reputation not only on award-winning performances but also on his calm personality, thoughtful interviews, and unshakable composure. He was known for answering even difficult questions with a smile and a bit of humor. That was why the mood shift during this particular segment felt so dramatic. Viewers tuning in expected a lighthearted conversation about his memoir, a few stories from his career, and maybe a preview of upcoming projects. Instead, they watched as the tone grew sharper and the atmosphere noticeably heavier. The day itself began normally. The studio buzzed with activity as crew members adjusted lights, hosts reviewed notes, and makeup artists applied last-minute touch. Coffee cups steamed on the table while the audience filed in and settled into their seats. McConaughey waited in the green room, chatting politely with staff as producers outlined the segment. He was told the discussion would focus on his best-selling memoir, his upbringing in Texas, and how those experiences shaped his outlook on life. It was familiar territory for him, something he had spoken about many times before. When he walked onto the stage, the crowd greeted him with warm applause. Whoopi Goldberg stood to welcome him, offering a friendly hug, followed by greetings from the other co-hosts. Everything appeared smooth and professional. However, as he reached the far end of the table to greet Joy Behar, the interaction felt noticeably cooler. The handshake was brief, the smile polite but distant. It was subtle, but enough to hint that the conversation might not be entirely predictable. Once seated, Whoopi opened the segment by congratulating him on the continued success of his memoir, praising how long it had remained on the bestseller lists. McConaughey thanked her in his familiar relaxed tone, explaining that sharing personal stories had been both challenging and rewarding, and that he never expected so many readers to connect so strongly with his experiences. Sunny Hostin followed up by asking about his childhood in Texas and the traditional values he often mentioned in interviews. She wondered how those early lessons influenced his choices now, especially while working in the entertainment industry. McConaughey leaned back slightly, considering his words carefully. He explained that values to him were like a compass, something steady that guides decisions, no matter where life takes you. Whether in a small town or a major city, he said, certain principles stayed the same. Until then, Joy Behar had remained quiet, listening closely. But at that point, she leaned forward, her tone noticeably sharper. She repeated the phrase, traditional values, placing emphasis on the words, and suggested that when public figures used that phrase, it often hinted at opinions that could divide audiences. The comment shifted the energy in the room almost instantly. McConaughey's expression changed slightly, though he remained composed. He calmly replied that he did not see his beliefs as coded language, but simply as honesty about what mattered to him, personal responsibility, treating others with respect, and working hard for one's goals. In his view, these were basic principles that anyone could appreciate. Joy responded skeptically, suggesting that his definition might imply criticism of those who held different views. The tension was now visible to everyone, including the other hosts, who exchanged quick glances. Whoopi attempted to redirect the discussion toward the creative process behind the book, hoping to bring the conversation back to safer ground. But Joy pressed on, explaining that celebrities often spoke about values in broad terms, while avoiding what those ideas meant in real-world situations. She asked whether he was referring to traditional ideas about family roles, relationships, or social influence. The question landed heavily, and for the first time, McConaughey's frustration became more noticeable. He clarified that he was referring to universal ideas such as honesty, commitment to loved ones, and keeping one's word. He added that, If those ideas were interpreted as political statements, that interpretation said more about the listener than about his intentions. His voice remained steady, but the warmth from earlier in the interview had faded. Joy countered that everything in public life could be viewed as political, including the image he presented to the world. At that point, the studio grew quiet, the audience sensing the seriousness of the moment. The easy rhythm of a promotional interview had been replaced by careful pauses and measured words. Although the conversation did not erupt into shouting, the shift in tone was unmistakable. It became one of those rare live television moments where viewers could feel the discomfort through their screens. For many watching at home, it was surprising to see such a reserved actor placed in a situation that challenged his calm image so directly. By the time the segment ended, both sides had made their positions clear, and the hosts moved on to the next topic. Yet the moment lingered, sparking online discussions and debates about values, public perception, and how easily a friendly interview can turn serious under the bright lights of live television. Joy continued, her voice firm and unyielding, saying that even a book celebrating a Texas upbringing could be seen as political, especially when it highlighted ideas she believed were tied to larger cultural debates. She pointed out that sitting on a national stage and speaking about traditional values, as if they existed in a neutral space, ignored how loaded those words had become in modern conversations. To her, that disconnect was part of the issue. McConaughey responded more sharply than before, his calm delivery slipping for the first time. He said that not every belief or life lesson needed to be examined through a political filter, and that some ideas could simply be shared human experiences that did not belong to any one side. He added that people were allowed to talk about family, discipline, and respect without automatically being placed into a political category. Joy let out a short laugh that carried no warmth. She remarked that it was easy to speak about neutrality when you came from a place of comfort and success. In her view, someone with his background did not get to claim that their words carried no broader meaning. The comment landed heavily, and McConaughey's posture changed immediately. The relaxed presence viewers were used to seeing vanished, replaced by visible tension. He repeated her words slowly, clearly hurt, and said she had no real understanding of his personal history. He spoke about growing up in a household that was far from perfect, about difficult family experiences, working physically demanding jobs to support himself, and facing years of rejection before finding stability in his career. He said reducing his entire life to a single label ignored the struggles and effort that shaped him. The room fell quiet, and even the audience seemed unsure how to react. Joy paused briefly, then pushed back, saying he was not a victim and that his achievements and wealth showed how fortunate he had been. She argued that pointing out privilege was not an insult but an observation. McConaughey stood up, clearly overwhelmed by emotion, and asked what about the privilege of judging someone without knowing their full story. He questioned the fairness of assuming motives or character based on background alone, and challenged the idea that disagreement automatically meant hostility. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment play out. Joy told him to sit down and suggested he was overreacting, waving her hand dismissively. That only intensified his frustration. He said defending himself was not being dramatic, especially after being spoken about in ways that felt unfair and dismissive. Joy replied that she was not attacking him personally, but rather questioning the image he presented to the public. She suggested that his humble persona clashed with his level of success. He answered that it was not an act, and that he was simply being himself, but that she had already decided who he was based on assumptions. At that point, Whoopi finally stepped in, asking both of them to pause and breathe, urging McConaughey to sit down and suggesting they change direction. He slowly lowered himself back into his chair, but the tension remained thick in the air. Joy continued, saying that when public figures spoke about traditional values, people naturally wanted clarity about what that meant, especially when similar language was used in political debates. McConaughey replied that he was tired of seeing simple ideas twisted into something divisive. He repeated that he had only spoken about respect, responsibility, and kindness, and could not understand how those ideas had been turned into something negative. Joy countered that context mattered, and that words carried weight when spoken by someone with influence. He answered that the only message he wanted to send was that some principles were bigger than politics, though it seemed to frustrate her. She said she was not threatened by him, only disappointed, which visibly affected him. His face tightened, and he asked why disagreement should equal disappointment. He said it should be possible for people to hold different views without being treated as morally flawed. Joy responded that believing in equality and fairness was not ideology, but basic decency. McConaughey raised his voice, saying he had never opposed any of those things, and that she was assigning beliefs to him that he had not expressed. He said turning his words into something extreme crossed a line and felt deeply unfair. Joy leaned back, her expression unreadable, and made a short remark implying that criticism was deserved. That final comment seemed to push the situation even closer to boiling over, leaving the studio silent and viewers stunned at how quickly a routine interview had transformed into one of the most uncomfortable moments the show had seen in years. McConaughey's composure finally broke completely. He shook his head in disbelief and said that the comment about, "if the shoe fits," was unfair and dismissive. He argued that what truly fit, in his view, was the stereotype of someone who had already made up their mind about others and could, no longer, hold a real conversation without assuming the worst. He said, it was deeply disappointing to see a public figure use a powerful platform in a way that, from his perspective, pushed people further apart instead of encouraging understanding. Joy stood up as well, her voice rising to match his intensity. She said she was not the one spreading divisive ideas, and accused him of hiding controversial messages behind pleasant-sounding language. He answered that he had done no such thing. He insisted that he had only shared basic ideas that many people across different backgrounds could agree on, regardless of politics. He added that what seemed to bother her most was the possibility that someone could hold a different point of view without fitting neatly into categories. Sonny Hostin attempted to calm the situation, suggesting that everyone take a step back and lower their voices. But McConaughey was no longer willing to retreat. He pointed toward Joy and said he was tired of constantly holding back just to avoid upsetting people who believed they alone had the right to define what was morally acceptable. He explained what he meant by traditional values in practical terms. To him, they meant sitting across from someone with a different opinion and speaking honestly without attacking their character. They meant giving others the benefit of the doubt instead of immediately assuming bad intentions. They meant treating guests with basic courtesy, not putting them on the defensive or turning conversations into personal confrontations. Joy's face flushed as she replied that she had no personal grudges against him, only professional standards. She said that when public figures used language she believed carried hidden meaning, she felt it was her responsibility to question it openly. McConaughey repeated the phrase, professional standards, with clear frustration. He asked whether it was professional to imply harmful beliefs without evidence, to mock someone's background, or to dismiss their life experiences. He questioned whether it was appropriate to turn what should have been a friendly discussion about a book into something that felt like an interrogation, driven by ideology. Joy quickly responded that she had never directly accused him of holding hateful views. He answered that she did not need to say certain words out loud for the implication to be understood. He reminded her of how she had described him earlier, reducing him to a label rather than acknowledging the complexity of his life. Joy replied that she was simply stating what she believed to be reality. She told him he lived in a comfortable world shaped by fame and success, and that he could not truly understand the daily struggles of people without those advantages. He let out a short, bitter laugh. He spoke about his childhood, about growing up in a home filled with instability, about financial hardship, and about years spent doing demanding work while chasing an acting career that offered rejection far more often than opportunity. He described sleeping in his car and wondering if his efforts would ever amount to anything. He said hearing his life described as sheltered felt deeply inaccurate and painful. For a moment, Joy appeared surprised by the level of detail, but her expression soon hardened again. She pointed out that he had now achieved enormous success and questioned why. Instead of focusing publicly on helping others, he chose to speak about values that she believed changed little in practical terms. He asked how she could possibly know what he did privately to support others, what causes he cared about, or how he used his resources. He said she knew nothing about his life away from the cameras, yet seemed comfortable judging his character based on a short exchange. Joy replied that she could only react to what he chose to share publicly, and that on this day he had chosen to speak about values rather than spotlighting specific social causes. That accusation seemed to push him beyond restraint. His voice grew loud enough that crew members paused their work to look up. He asked how she could question what was meaningful to him when, in his view, she spent her own platform highlighting conflict and mistrust. He said that constantly assuming the worst about others did more harm than good, and that it was unfair to criticize his intentions without truly listening to him. Joy, clearly shaken but unyielding, said she was simply holding him accountable, as she believed journalists should do. He responded with a sharp, incredulous laugh and said that he did not recognize what had just happened as journalism. He pointed out that she had barely asked about his book or his work before drawing conclusions about his character. He told her that the moment he mentioned values, the discussion shifted from curiosity to accusation. In his view, that was not objective questioning, but advocacy disguised as reporting. Joy fired back that, as a public figure promoting a book, everything he said was open to scrutiny, and the tension in the studio remained, thick as the argument, showed no sign of cooling down. McConaughey's calm finally vanished entirely. He shook his head in disbelief and exclaimed, "If the shoe fits? Are you serious right now, Joy?" His voice carried a mixture of frustration and incredulity. "You know what really fits," he continued, slamming his hand lightly on the table for emphasis. "It fits the stereotype of someone who assumes the worst about anyone who doesn't think exactly like them, someone who can't have a real conversation without immediately turning it into a judgment. That's what fits. That's the real disappointment." He leaned forward, his gaze steady, locking onto Joy. "It's disappointing that someone with your platform would use it to divide people instead of finding a way to bring them together." Joy, refusing to back down, stood as well. "I'm not promoting division disguised as traditional values," she said firmly. "I haven't spread any harmful messages. I'm simply calling out language that could be interpreted in ways that hurt others. You can't stand the idea that someone might see your words differently than you intend. You can't stand the thought that people might have a perspective that doesn't fit neatly into your worldview." Sonny Hostin tried to intervene, raising a hand in an attempt to calm both parties. "Maybe we should take a step back, everyone," she suggested cautiously. But McConaughey shook his head vehemently, pointing toward Joy. "No, I'm done stepping back. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around people who think they have a monopoly on what's morally right. You want to know what traditional values look like in real life, Joy? They look like sitting down with people who disagree with you and having an honest conversation without attacking their character. They look like giving someone the benefit of the doubt instead of assuming the worst. They look like treating your guests with basic respect instead of ambushing them with your own assumptions." Joy's face flushed red as she fired back. "I don't have personal grudges against you, Matthew. I have professional standards. When someone comes on this show and uses coded language, it's my job to call it out." McConaughey repeated the phrase with deliberate disdain. "Professional standards. Is it professional to imply someone holds prejudiced views without a shred of evidence, to mock someone's background, to dismiss years of struggle as though it never happened? Is it professional to turn a book interview into an ideological inquisition? You never directly accused me of anything," Joy protested. "That's the point," he snapped. "You didn't need to say the words. You made it perfectly clear what you think about me. Rich white man from Texas talking about traditional values, loud and clear. That's the subtext you chose, and it's wrong." Joy leaned forward, her tone firm. "Matthew, you live in a bubble. You make movies, write books, give interviews, and somehow think that gives you insight into the world, but you don't understand what life is like for people without your advantages. McConaughey let out a bitter laugh. I don't understand. My father was an alcoholic who abused my mother. We moved constantly because we couldn't pay rent. I worked grueling manual labor jobs while auditioning for years, facing rejection after rejection. I slept in my car more nights than I care to remember. But sure, Joy, tell me more about my bubble. For the first time, Joy seemed momentarily taken aback, but she quickly regained composure. And now you've made it, Matthew. Instead of using your platform to help people in similar situations, you talk about traditional values as though that will solve everything. How do you know what I do to help people? He countered sharply. You don't know what causes I support, what charities I contribute to, or how I use my platform to make a difference. Yet you're comfortable making assumptions about my character based on a short conversation. Joy responded, What I react to what you choose to make public, and today you chose to talk about traditional values instead of using your platform for something more meaningful. The words seemed to push him past the point of restraint. His voice filled the studio, startling crew and audience alike. Meaningful. You want to lecture me on what's meaningful? You sit behind this desk spreading cynicism, tearing people down, assuming the worst about anyone who doesn't agree with you. And then you question what I find meaningful. That's rich. Joy held firm. I'm holding people accountable, Matthew. That's what journalists do, question, challenge, and hold public figures responsible. McConaughey laughed, harsh and incredulous. That's journalism, he asked. You didn't ask a single meaningful question about my book, my work, or my beliefs. Instead, you launched into assumptions based on your own ideas about me. When I mentioned values, you turned it into an attack. That's not journalism, Joy. That's activism disguised as reporting. You're a public figure promoting a book. Joy fired back. Your views are subject to scrutiny. Scrutiny. McConaughey shot back. You mean character assassination based on stereotypes. There's a difference between asking tough questions and deciding someone is a villain because they don't follow your political orthodoxy. Joy's voice rose, straining with intensity. You mean basic human decency. You mean caring about people who are different from you. McConaughey slammed his hand on the table, voice cracking with emotion. Assuming I don't care about people different from me. Assuming I lack basic decency. Based on what, Joy? Because I mentioned traditional values. Because of where I'm from. Because of the color of my skin. Or because of the company I keep politically. Joy fired back that celebrities who discuss traditional values often align with certain politicians, and their words carry real-world consequences. McConaughey fell silent for a moment, then narrowed his eyes. So now you're attacking me not for what I said, but for what other people have said. I'm guilty by association. You want to turn personal principles like hard work, respect, and family care into weapons for your argument. You call that responsibility. That's not what I said, and it's not what I believe. Joy stood straighter, refusing to retreat. I'm not apologizing for calling out coded language, she said. Coded language, McConaughey said, voice dripping with incredulity. You call everything you disagree with coded language. That's your way to shut down conversation without engaging with the person in front of you. That's intellectual cowardice. Joy's face burned red. I've had difficult conversations on television for decades. You've been playing pretend for a living. McConaughey's body tensed, and his voice dropped to a deadly quiet. Playing pretend? Is that what you think my career, my success, my life is? That the stories I tell in my book about overcoming adversity are make-believe? You live in a fantasy world where reactionary values can go unchallenged. Reactionary values, he repeated slowly, each word deliberate. Personal responsibility is reactionary. Treating people with respect is reactionary. Working hard for what you want is reactionary. Taking care of your family is reactionary. Is that really the hill you want to die on, Joy? Because those are the principles I live by. When she tried to continue, McConaughey exploded one last time, his voice echoing across the studio. I never justified inequality. I never mentioned oppression. I spoke about human principles that transcend politics, and you turned it into an inquisition because you can't tolerate someone having a worldview outside of your political agenda. You want to know what's truly oppressive, Joy? It's people like you policing everyone else's thoughts, assuming anyone who disagrees must be evil or stupid. That's the real threat, not an actor from Texas talking about working hard and treating people with respect. The studio went completely silent, broken only by heavy breaths from both McConaughey and Joy. The other hosts looked on, stunned and unsure how to salvage the show. Finally, Whoopi's voice cut through the tension. "We're going to take a commercial break," she said, trying to restore order. McConaughey, however, wasn't done. Hands trembling from residual anger, he started removing his microphone pack. "You know what, Joy? I came here to talk about my book, to share stories, maybe inspire people. Instead, I got lectured by someone who thinks she knows how everyone should think and feel. You want to know what traditional values look like in practice? They look like admitting when you're wrong. Something you clearly wouldn't recognize if it hit you in the face." As he walked toward the exit, he turned back one final time, eyes blazing. "And for the record, next time you want to attack someone's character, maybe try getting to know them first. You might be surprised by what you learn when you actually listen, instead of waiting for your turn to tear someone down." With that, Matthew McConaughey walked off the set of The View, leaving behind one of the most unforgettable confrontations in daytime television history. The tension, emotion, and raw honesty of the exchange had left everyone in the studio and viewers at home completely stunned. Many were left debating, had Joy gone too far, or had McConaughey lost control? The moment was a stark reminder of how quickly a conversation can escalate when personal beliefs, assumptions, and emotions collide.